The Longest Story in the World by Paul Mars. Wisely, when the girl was asked, on pain of death, to entertain and divert him with a story, she decided to create the longest story in the world. This would, she thought, prolong her life. Every evening, as velvety dark settled on the palace of the Caliph, as the noise from the streets and the bazaars died down, and all that could be heard from outside was the cryptic shrieks of beasts beyond the city's walls, she would slip him just one installment of an immense narrative, and, doing so nightly through the years, she thought that her life would be spared. This story, expounded luxuriously through humid, freezing, stormy, placid nights, might last as long as her natural life. The wicked Caliph, curled petulantly in his silk and damask sheets, would be satisfied and merciful. He listened to her stories. Each evening's chapter would end naturally with a provoking, enticing cliffhanger, with his gilded guards, his vizier, and his cage of salacious parrots. They would claw at their bars, and the vizier's eyes would narrow to slits as the girl sat calmly on her stool in the emerald bedchamber and told her story. They were entranced despite themselves. She had snared them all in the fabulously infinite unfolding of her tale. This was how, when she was quite young, she embarked on the telling. The old man lived on a mountain slope in a small white house, much the same as the other houses in this ramshackle city. The countryside was dry as sand, and everyone who lived there was as poor as a pigeon. The old man lived with his granddaughter, and it was a frugal, quiet life. Each evening she would sit at his feet in a perfect impersonation of a good, dutiful grandchild, and perching on a stool much like the one where I sit now, she regaled him with tales. She had clear emerald eyes. She would stare straight into the old man's eyes, and he would grow discomfited, tugging his rug over his knees and wondering, where does this child come from? How can she know such stories? She would pretend that her tales were a kind of clairvoyance. She would tell her grandfather that his future would be very different from his present reduced circumstances. The logs on the fire would crack and pop, making him jump, and he would find himself longing for some peace and quiet, and to stop this child rambling on. When she had been younger, he had delighted in hearing her wide-eyed, breathless inventions. Such nonsense she talked. Phantoms, and journeys, and miraculous cities, and endless plains. As she grew older, the old man thought she would grow out of creating her fabulous diversions, for what was fitting for a child to say became tantamount in this land to blasphemy in the mouth of an adult. But the girl showed no sign of putting an end to her tales. The old man himself had no taste for fantasy. Like many of his people, he believed it sacrilegious and disrespectful to their godlike ancestors, who had, through cunning and expertise, brought so many boons to their country. Why invent other myths? Such things could cause trouble. But when his granddaughter was quite small, he drew some small pleasure and pride from hearing her fairy stories. She told him that he would grow younger with every year. He would regain his youth and his strength, and he would do battle with the doughty powers of darkness. Like a child, she cleanly split the world into opposing factions and placed him, his hypothetically goodly and heroic self, on the side of the angels. He would, she said, slay monsters, infiltrate corrupt dynasties and empires, and bring vampires to their knees in their own dust. Witches would tremble at the mention of his name. Ah, but which name? He would adopt many in his travels. And they would flee into the desolate night, clutching their filthy rags about them at his passing. Demons, megalomaniacs, despots, all would fear his arrival in their lands. And he would transform himself again and again. He would be eternal, no longer this elderly wreck of a man. The girl grew older. Still a child in her grandfather's eyes, but to the outer world she had almost attained maturity. Still she was saying, with her earnest jade eyes fixed on his, "You will make your home on 100 worlds." She had grown older and bolder. She told him, "You will fashion a machine that will bear us both beyond this land. You are brilliant, and your talent will drive you to create a traveling engine of infinite capacity and potential. Your frustration with this place and your own mortality while you are here will fire the green jewel that will power your traveling machine. The machine will be vast inside, though it looks only a humble abode. Inside it will be like a city, a world of your own." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. It made him ashamed to laugh at her ramblings, because she spoke in all seriousness. It isn't kind for the aged to mock the illusions of the young. He said, "And where, my dear, will this miraculous engine take me?" "Why, anywhere," she said, and clutched his knees. "This is what I have been saying all along. You will go anywhere and everywhere, and no one will harm you." Once again he found himself disturbed by her fervor. The girl was becoming obsessed. In recent months he had even wondered about having a court physician talk to her about her fantasies. But the physicians were notorious tittle-tattlers. No sooner had one of them taken his guileless granddaughter beneath his dubious wing than he would have spread word far and wide throughout the court that the old man had raised and harbored a mad girl, a changeling and a witch, and thus had endangered them all. They would both be burned and have their hearts plucked out. It was all his own fault, the old man decided, because he had indulged her madness. Yet he wondered sometimes, given how little he actually knew of his adopted granddaughter's people, whether she might just have a little gift of sight. He took responsibility for this child. If she was mad, then he must protect her. The court and the city would have little mercy. Her kind of delusions were threatening, a kind of sickness that could make faith crumble as easy as masonry. She would be flung out beyond the court, the city, the mountain itself, into the forest and the foothills. She would be returned to the wolves in the province from which she came, wandering as a lost child. If the old man asked anyone for help, they would make him turn her out into the wilderness. All he could do was protect her, make her keep quiet in public. One day, at the open markets, as he was greeting friends, rather high-up senators whom he had known before he retired from that sort of work, his granddaughter went into one of her trances. The old man could see by the set of her jaw and the curious light that came into her eyes. He hustled her away from the senators, bidding farewell before she could break into one of her tales. Walking home down the dusty hill, she was babbling happily. "All over the galaxy, men are turning themselves into golems. They use minerals and metals, potions and machines to make themselves less creatures of organic, fleshly substances, and more equipped to do harm to others, to traverse the deadly frozen expanses between the worlds." She caught her breath then, looking alarmed at him, her voice more urgent. "They are already here, on this mountain, in our city, at work in the court. This place has already surrendered itself to their implacable machine-like will. This is why you must engineer our escape, grandfather. It must be soon." The old man turned to her, and he was testy with her. He took her hands and tried to dissuade her from raving. Couldn't she see the danger she put them both in? She fled then. He was left shouting in the street, the wind whipping at his robes and stinging his eyes as she disappeared in the crowd. He couldn't run after her. He had no chance of catching her. He could only pray she wouldn't find someone else to rant at. The old man returned home to wait. He wanted to sit by the fire and wait for her to return. He would consider what to say to her when, eventually, the door unlocked and she slipped sheepishly in to apologize, to promise she would grow up less fanciful. But what, he thought, as he trudged down the hill between the White House walls of neighbors he didn't even know? What if the child had already taken herself off into the wilderness? What if, hysterically perceiving herself to be a threat to her grandfather in her prattling heresies. What if she fled back to the wolves? He must be more optimistic. The child wouldn't be so foolish as to endanger them both. No one would know, he reassured himself, fumbling in his robe pockets for his keys to their house. No one knew the kinds of things she had been saying. He was wrong. When he entered their home, he found that he had guests. They stood in the room as if to attention. All were armed and grim, their faces in shadow, and it seemed they were denuded of all personality. Their leader had his long legs up on the table. He swung them off as the old man entered, and he welcomed them to his own house. The old man spluttered his complaints, but he knew what was happening. They had been watching and listening to the old man and his granddaughter. For quite some time, it appeared. The girl bowed her head as she addressed the Caliph directly, in her own voice, once this installment of the tale had ended. "Tomorrow evening, Excellency, I shall tell another." "But what is this? A complete tale? What is its meaning?" "That will become apparent only through accumulation of parts. Tomorrow we continue." "The same tale continues?" The Caliph's eyes narrowed greedily. Boldly, the girl smiled at him. "Oh, certainly, my Caliph. It continues and continues and continues." "Then," he said softly, "so long as it does, your life will be spared." She nodded, and under guard, withdrew.